Hello there, Hawkeye fans, and welcome to the Hawkeye Hotspot podcast here on hawkfanatic.com. It is Thursday, March the 28th, 9:15 a.m. Central Time. I am Rob Howe, joined by Scott Docterman from The Athletic. We're going to talk a little Hawkeye sports. Imagine that on the Hawkeye Hotspot podcast. As you can probably hear in my voice, I am not 100% today, but I'm going to play anyway. And we got a lot to talk about, so it's worth it. So if I start going into a hacking fit, Scott will take over the podcast and I'll disappear and come back for a minute. But I was thinking about this, Scott, before we get into Hawkeye sports, and I see you with your World Championship Cubs hat on there and your sweatshirt and all that. I got no Mets gear on today. I gave my son, he started a new job and he needed a hat to hold his hair back. So I gave him my Mr. Met hat so he could spread the brand at a local restaurant here in town. But we grew up in a generation where this was awesome, opening day, and baseball was so big, and it just was a part of a big part of our generation. It's faded quite a bit, but there's still something special about opening day, at least for me. I'm still romantic about it, even though the game has pissed me off so much since I was a kid.
I hate to admit it, Rob, and maybe it's because it's still March, but I didn't know really it was opening day till this morning.
Well, you're a football guy anyway.
Yeah, I'm a football guy. Sweet 16, we got all this basketball stuff, and it's March 28th. It used to be like an early, like wasn't opening day usually coincide with the national championship game? For a while, that Monday of you'd have like one shining moment at the end of the day, and then you'd have Cincinnati baseball, and then it started to be the Sunday night, opener, and then now now we're in March playing baseball.
And they already played two in South Korea,
right? And I'm just kind of like, oh yeah, I guess it's baseball, and then. I still my first ever game was when Tuffy Rhodes hit 3 home runs in his first 3 at bats against the Mets.
Really?
Yeah, first game I ever attended at Wrigley, and of course the Mets still won. It's the story of my life, I suppose. I've seen some great ones. When I'd covered Kansas City area sports and the Royals, the most interesting, opening day game and second most interesting game I've ever covered was in 2004, when going into the bottom of the ninth, the White Sox led the Royals 7-3. And then the Royals came back and scored 6 in the bottom of the ninth to win on a Carlos Beltran 2-run shot. And then to top it off, I was standing outside the Royals locker room and I got kind of pushed in the back. And I'm like, what the hell? And it was Garth Brooks because he went to spring training with the Royals, or he was down there taking hacks and stuff. And so he was trying to get in the locker room, and, I'm like, oh, I'll live. I'm not going to start a fight here, but I enjoyed going to opening day all those years. It is still magical for us old dudes. And unfortunately the sport is just, it's really out of sight, out of mind in so many ways, and they only have themselves to blame.
Yeah, they've done, incredible damage to minor league cities across the country. It's been bad, but I still all the crap that they've done it from an administration standpoint and money grabs and all that other stuff. I still remember being a kid and pulling up the newspaper, looking at the box scores, looking at the standings, things like that. It's just those things kind of get ingrained in you.
Yeah, for sure. I remember coming home in 89. It would have been freshman year of high school for me, and watching Mitch Williams walk the bases loaded, then strike the next 3 batters out to beat the Phillies in 89.
Wild thing.
Yep. Perfect time for him, came right after, Major League. And then, of course, the Cubs went on and won the division that year and got beat in the playoffs, as always. But, you remember those things. Those things are great. But the sad part is, again, I don't know, it's so far out of sight, out of mind, that I think baseball needs a reckoning.
And typical with what baseball can't get out of its own way right now, the biggest story is one of its biggest stars being embroiled in a gambling
Right.
investigation, which we went through here not
Yeah.
long ago. So, yeah, it's anymore. It doesn't seem like a lot of the focus is on like the actual competition in sports anymore. It seems to be these side stories. But anyway, Fran McCaffrey is a big baseball fan, big Phillies fan.
Yeah.
And grew up in Philly. They got a good squad this year. They got a chance.
Yeah.
But we're going to start with men's basketball, which exited the NIT on Sunday night at Utah. I didn't see, did Utah advance last night? Did they beat VCU? Do you know?
I don't know, but let me look that up, Rob.
But tough road game. Iowa did not play well.
Oh,
And season came to an end at what, 19-15
yep.
for Iowa. So, um, mixed bag this year, really some fun moments and just didn't do enough really to obviously to get in the NCAA tournament, and then also having to go on the road in the second round to Salt Lake City in the NIT. A better regular season when I've had them a better seed in that tournament and maybe would have been hosting that could have been a different story. But the book is closed on this season, and now we look ahead with a very, very cloudy 24-25. Tony Perkins, Patrick McCaffrey. Patrick McCaffrey had previously posted on Instagram that he wasn't coming back to Iowa, and then a day or two later, yesterday, Wednesday, he went into the portal. So the two guys that had a COVID year left are in the portal. So that leaves Peyton Sanford and Evan Bronze currently as the only upperclassmen projected to be on this roster. There are 9 scholarships spoken for, and that's uh, if you include Cooper Koch and Chris Tajo, the incoming freshmen. So there are 4 open scholarships, Scott. And that kind of leads us, I think, into the meat of this discussion is we talked a little bit before we hit record. I do think, and I've talked with people on Twitter about this and on message boards, and I've written about it, and I know we've talked about it on here. I do think this is somewhat of a crossroads for Iowa men's basketball.
Yeah, this is we've been moving down this path for a while. I mean, and this year we're celebrating the 25th anniversary of the last Sweet 16 team.
Cooper
And
Koch's dad was on it.
right, J.R. Koch and Jess Settles, I saw the other night. You've got some great players, Kent McCausland, but that's a long time ago. That is a
you think
long
about
time.
it, the son of one of the players on that team will be a freshman at Iowa next year, and they still
Exactly.
haven't been back to the Sweet 16. That kind of puts that in perspective for you.
My son will be 25 in 2 months, and he wasn't born at that point. So
Yeah.
that's just insane. I mean, we're talking about the last century, and we're talking about a quarter of a century since we're there. I mean, it sounds that bad, and it really is. I mean, for teams that have hiccuped their way to the Sweet 16 and beyond, but specifically the Sweet 16. I mean, 97 other teams have made it since Iowa last made it, and that's really that's kind of embarrassing, frankly. But there's been a chip every single step along the way to this behemoth that was Iowa men's basketball. But at this point, it's kind of at this juncture of, are you going to be relevant or are you going to fade away? And is Fran McCaffrey built for the long haul, or is this short time, and why? I think that's really the thought going in right now is what can Iowa do? What's the next step? I think the base that's left behind can be competitive, but it's not about just being competitive, Rob. It's not about that at all in sports. I mean, you want to be competitive, but you got to sell hope. There always has to be hope, or otherwise sports are dead. You have to have hope. Hope springs eternal. We're talking about it on opening day. I mean, the team I'm covering every year, this is our year. Well, it was once in the last 100 and whatever, 16 years.
86 was my team's last year.
Yeah. So we're talking about almost 40 years for you.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I mean, but they have been in the series since then. But the thing is, with Iowa, what kind of hope do you have for the future? Is Iowa in a perpetual state of purgatory in the men's basketball program? And I think it is, because how long is Fran going to be here? This year? Is this his last year? Next year? Is that going to be his last year? His son decided he didn't want to be here anymore for the reasons that we'll go into. It's not a healthy state. And then you see the NIL money that Iowa is able to raise on the side is very minimal when it comes to men's basketball as compared to even lower level programs. And then you look at the attendance, and you look at the season ticket sales, and then you look at the performance too, Rob. I mean, they gave up more points this year per game than they ever had in the Fran McCaffrey era. Almost 80 points a game. And so I think there is a crossroads, and it's unfortunate that it comes at the same time that the women are at an all-time high, because somebody like Beth Getz can't put all of her thoughts into men's basketball, and that really needs to be there, because it's an unhealthy state, and it's a purgatory, if you will.
Yeah, and it's just the layers to this, and the NIL portion of it. And even the bigger picture, Scott, when we went, go back to when we were initially talking about how the NIL was going to work, that it's a pie of money that comes in. And for so many years, it was a pretty strict system where you donated to the university, you could, build facilities and give a bunch of money, have your name put on all that stuff, or go to the big projects like the new football facility, things like that. But for the most part, for a large part of it, the university, the athletic department, figured out where the money was going and supporting each program. And we took a long time to get a practice facility built. So this isn't new around here. The men's basketball program has been behind in terms of its competition, in terms of support for a while now, going back to Tom Davis. Steve Alford certainly did not help matters. The Pierre Pierce thing, I think, still lingers 20 years later. That was a problem. And then there was Licklider, and then there's Fran. And it just seems like it's been pretty much the same story in terms of the obstacles this program has to overcome. Now you add in the NIL element. Tony Perkins wants to be here. He likes Fran. He likes Iowa City. He likes Iowa. He wants to be here. Iowa cannot afford him. Mm-hmm. It's as simple as that. Patrick, different situation, but Patrick will make more money when he goes somewhere else than he would make at Iowa. If you want to get rid of Fran, and I'm not telling you you shouldn't, because maybe it's run its course and people will be more willing to give should a new coach come in. But here's the thing. If you fire Fran today and you start a search for coaches, anybody worth the salt, anybody worth the shit is going to want to know what your NIL package is. What are my resources? That has nothing to do with Fran. That has something to do with this basketball program. And that's the crossroads. Mm-hmm. What is this university going to do for a men's basketball program that gets less support? And you can come up with any reason why that is. You don't like the coach. You don't like the game atmosphere. The games are late. The home schedule sucks, whatever it is. But when women's basketball, wrestling, and football are ahead of your men's basketball program, you're behind the competition.
Mm-hmm. No question. And in the Big Ten, it's a continuous fist fight for players to win games. And when you look, Iowa has continuously slipped behind. And again, there are reasons, there are factors, and there are excuses, and all of them fit. And you can move your argument any way you want to in this, and that you're not exactly wrong. That's what makes it so complicated. This is not easy.
No.
There are so many layers and angles to this that, an AD can't fix, a coach can't fix by themselves. A new AD, a new basketball coach can't fix. Winning can't fix. It's embedded to this program for a long, long, long time. I mean, it's too many of us, meaning people my age group, yours, and on up, remember the 80s, and we remember the successes, but we don't pay attention to how did it slip? How did it fall? How did it kind of matriculate itself into this position? Through the 90s, Iowa was competitive, and there were little moments. I mean, Chris Street dying, that may have been Tom Davis's best true team, because he walked into the best situation player-wise you've ever seen. The fact that he didn't get Rafe LaFrentz, and then the fact that Bob Bowlesby didn't renew his contract because people wanted him out. They wanted to go to the next level.
And that cost him Nick Collison.
It cost him Nick Collison. Then Steve Alford came, and everybody thought they were going to go to the next level. Well, they didn't realize that Steve was different. I mean, people who covered Alford hate his guts. I came in on the very end. I didn't really like him, but but the Pierre Pierce situation, it burned anybody that was a casual fan of Iowa basketball. They would go a couple times of the year, would pay attention. Then they just, no, I'm not dealing with that. And then, Alford himself, the program wasn't as successful as it was under Tom Davis. And then you look, and he got pushed out. I mean, they were a year away from being a number 2 seed being second place in the Big Ten, which was the best that they've been since Lute Olson was there, and winning the Big Ten tournament, and then get knocked out in the first round. And then from after that, people just wanted him gone, and he did. He left. And then Licklider just nosedived. And Fran we all know, but it's also been almost 15 years now, did a nice job of rebuilding the program. But I think that the ceiling is really low at Iowa. The ceiling at Iowa is 20 wins, get to the tournament, based on the giving levels, based on recruiting and competition. There are ways to push up the ceiling, play better defense, get a couple better players in here, fill the arena, that type of thing. But how do you do it? That is complicated, and it may require pushing reset and buying into the reset. And I don't know that Iowa fans are capable of doing that, because they can't handle Iowa going to the NIT and being on the bubble one year without saying fire everybody. What are they going to do if somebody comes in and has to rebuild? And it's, because if you bring in a new coach, Rob, this whole roster is going to go. You think Josh Dix is going to stay? You think Owen Freeman's going to stay on the open market? Owen Freeman's going to capture $1 million a year. And I'm not even being hyperbolic.
No, you're not. No, you're not. And again, with NIL, and we're going to further this conversation too, to not blame people, but steer where the issues are here, where this can be helped. You look at NIL, it's not only about acquisition, it's about retention. Mm-hmm. And we've seen this work in football. The year before, Cade McNamara, Eric All, Rusty Feth, Seth Anderson, that group. Invest in the program. You're investing, okay? Bring them in. This year, you know what? We want to invest in the guys we have on our defense to come back. We're going to keep these guys. Jay Higgins, Nick, Quinn, Sebastian, all these guys. Same situation pops up in basketball with Tony Perkins. Bye. Yeah. Sorry, we can't retain you. Mm-hmm. That's a problem. Now, and Scott and I have talked about this. Who do we point the finger at here? Well, and I had this conversation with somebody on Twitter last night. I want people to be want to be crystal clear here. I do not, in any sense, any way, blame the fans for not donating more to the NIL to retain Tony Perkins. That's not how this should be. They're not the reason this system is what it is right now, and it's the Wild West. That would be the University of Iowa, which is a member school of the NCAA, that screwed this thing up and has it where it is right now. Not the fans' responsibility. The NCAA needs to get its shit together yesterday on putting together a way to take the, maybe you don't take completely do away with the collectives, but the university needs to do its share to kick in to player compensation. It's not doing anything right now outside of the scholarships and maybe a little bit here or there, but this should not be on the fans, Scott. So, and I guess what I'm coming back to is Iowa men's basketball is a casualty of this, because if you circle back to the beginning of our conversation, the old system was there was more equity between the programs because the university was controlling the funds. Oh, you need a facilities upgrade. Okay, well this sport is in more need, so we're going to do theirs first, but then we'll get back to you. And we build a really nice new football facility. We build a really nice new wrestling facility. What's being done for men's basketball? What and the women's basketball, I caution people to try to compare that to what's going on with men's basketball right now. It's apples to oranges just because of the uniqueness of this women's basketball situation. And all praise to them. Lisa, her staff, the program, Caitlin, it's awesome. It's awesome for the state. It's awesome for the university. It's awesome. But none of that addresses the elephant in the room at Iowa right now, which is the men's basketball program.
Yeah, it's true. And the sports are different. Men's basketball traditionally has been, number two as far as revenue generation, and it is number two. I mean, even as much as Iowa women have been popular, it still loses the most money on campus. And part of that is the obscene non-media rights agreement between the leagues and their media rights partners.
Hopefully that changes in the future.
It should. But that said, the men's basketball component is there's just so much there. And the NCAA, the schools had screwed it up from day one. We saw the slippery slope. It was pretty damn obvious to most people here. And you had people, it was like the NCAA and its membership schools were like the council on Krypton before it blew up. It's like everybody could see it,
See, you made me cough.
I'm sorry, man. But, Jarrell sends his kid out. He knew better.
Yeah.
And then the place blew up. And that's kind of what we're at right now with this, that now what? Now what do? You can't put the shampoo back in the bottle or the toothpaste back in the tube or whatever you want to call it. I mean, it's out. But how do you, manage it? How do you bring it back to where it can be managed? And even then, what are you going to do about it? Because it is unfair. And one of our reporters, Seth Emerson, wrote about this a couple of weeks ago. It's unfair for a lot of these fans to feel like they are responsible for
100%. 100%.
Because you're asked to donate, you're asked to buy tickets, you're asked to support.
I think it was the iClub or somebody shot out a tweet yesterday for seat license donations.
Yeah.
You're paying for your seat in Kinnick already just to sit where you want to sit, in addition to paying for the tickets.
Exactly. And now you're asking, you need to donate to get these players on campus and everything like that.
We got to raise a bunch of money to get the left tackle from Alabama.
Yeah.
Come on, please donate.
Yeah. And
please won't you think of the kids?
Yeah. And then of course the kid leaves halfway through.
Exactly.
Right. But you have all these angles. And but when I say the University of Iowa and the athletics department at Iowa are responsible, that's everybody that's associated with it. And it does start with the basketball coach. And he can't be absolved of responsibility.
Not at all.
As a coach, he has done a very good job at Iowa. I would call it a B. I would grade his overall performance, whether I like him or not, and that's indifferent. on a personal level, I grade him as a B, because I think he elevated Iowa. He's taken Iowa to several tournaments. I mean, remember before this year, they were one of 10 programs nationally to go to 4 straight tournaments. And in that 4-year period, you also had a game where they had one of the great comebacks in NCAA history that was for naught, and lost in overtime. They were a number 2 seed, and they were a Big Ten tournament champion. That's 3 different years, by the way, not just the same year. Then you had this year, which I still maintain was one of his best coaching jobs, because they had nothing we knew of really substance-wise in the beginning. They played like crap in December, and then they were able to put themselves in a position where they were competitive for the NCAA tournament up until the last week. But what can Fran McCaffery do to ensure that people are energized to support the program financially and emotionally? He's got to do more in that area. And part of that is being able to drum up support among his base, because the base isn't energized by him. And is that, hey, I'm going to stop off at this club. I'm going to go into the stands and thank people for being here. That's not the case at all. I think that there is an emotional tug of war when you see Patrick leave, and it's obvious he's not happy there. Connor is angered by the base to some extent. They're not happy with the way that's been turned out. They're not happy with the way that fans have lashed out at them. And they're perfectly right in their thoughts, but the fans are also perfectly right into saying, we don't feel the same level of investment in us as we do to you. And so we're going to take a step back. And that's a dangerous, slippery slope for this program, because you want to be invested in the coaches. You have to. They're the ones who stay the longest. When you look at whether it was Hayden Fry 30 years ago, and Tom Davis felt like he was one of you guys. Hey, he was on the golf course. Hey, Lisa Bluter, everybody feels like they can have a cup of coffee with her. Tom Brands, wrestling coaches, they know he's with them. He's one of them. With Fran, and it could be as simple as just a disconnect because of where he's from. He just wants to coach basketball, and he does a nice job doing that, versus, he's not the right person for this time in history at the University of Iowa. And all of this is fair, and all of this should be on the table. Every single aspect. That's like they need to have a whiteboard the size of Carver Hawkeye Arena and write everything down, and then try to connect the dots. How do we make this? How do we make this? How do we make this? And, and then to top it off, Fran, in all of his success, he is the winningest coach in Iowa history. But he's also, close to 65 years old. And he has one son who's a junior in high school. One of his sons has decided I have eligibility, but I don't want to play here anymore. And, what's his level of investment in Iowa this year, next year, and beyond? Because as we know, this is why coaches want 5-year windows on their contract, so they can tell recruits, I'm going to be here for the long haul. Well, how can anybody with eyes believe Fran is here for the long haul? And what does that do? What would one more year, just, hey, we think he's going to leave, this is it. One more year at Iowa do for him and do for this program? Would it bury it? Because 1 year is a huge year in sports, especially at the high majors.
Yeah, and again, it circles back to the layer of, if he does come back next year, what are his resources? What can he do to build this roster? And I do want to speak to the Patrick situation here a little bit, because I know there's a lot of people taking it more on face value. Oh, shit, the kid doesn't want to play for his dad anymore. I think if you're paying attention and you watch this program, you know how close Fran and Patrick are and how that close that family is. It isn't about that. And maybe, I'm going to give people the benefit of the doubt, not knowing Patrick's history, from, getting thyroid cancer in junior high to losing his best friend to having to take medication since that cancer that makes it very difficult on his mood and on him to physically gain weight and strength. And then the anxiety that came in. And then his younger brother gets in an accident last summer as he's trying to deal with his anxiety. Sometimes people just need a fresh start. Maybe there's nothing nefarious here, and maybe it's just a guy that wants to spread. He's been here for 5 years. Maybe he just wants to try a new experience. I don't think there's anything controversial here. That's me. It to me, it's more with the Perkins situation, speaks more to the state of the Iowa basketball program and the resources. And again, as you said, I am not going to sit here and say that the university can't hire somebody that will do better than Fran. I'm because I don't know that. I have my own opinions on what Fran's been able to do with what he's been given to work with, and I think he's done pretty well. But again, it goes back to, what are you going to do for the new coach that you haven't done for this coach? That is the most important thing here. Because where was Fran before he came here, Scott?
He was at Siena.
Yeah, so that's a basketball power. So the last time they were able to attract a guy from Siena. Now what are you going to attract when you bring a guy in and say, yeah, our NIL man, yeah, it's not real good. Oh, sign me up. I'll take the job.
Yeah.
You're going to get, Darren DeVries in here and say to him, yeah, sorry, Darren. And then he goes to West Virginia and they're like, yeah, we'll take care of you. We'll help you build a roster here. That's the situation.
Right.
That's the foundation that we're dealing with here. Taking emotion out of it. That's what Beth has to deal with. And how much excitement would a new coach bring if that coach is somebody from a low major again or something like that? This is deep-seated stuff, Scott. And we've talked about it for years on this podcast, but it's now hit the crossroads.
Yeah, it's true, Rob, because when in covering, and I mean covering boots on the ground, I was in Atlanta in 2007. In 2010, I knew Licklider was getting fired before he did. I was at his office, and he was in Gary's office for 8 minutes that Monday morning. And so I was standing out when he was walking to Gary's office, and, oh, hi, Scott, how are you? And then 8 minutes later, he didn't say a word to me. I wonder why. But the difference in that 3-year period in the coaches who were interested in Iowa was extreme, was really different. In 2007, there were a lot of coaches at really good schools that wanted to think about coming to Iowa. In 2010, they really struggled to get people the same people who were interested in 2007 said nope in 2010. And
these folks are smart. They talk. Yeah. They know what the landscape is at each school.
And they also understand that they talk more in basketball than they do in the other sports. I mean,
it's a much closer knit community, I think.
Yeah, and they know what's going on, and let's put it this way: people have gotten smarter over the years at mid majors. They used to just take whatever high major job they could, for the money. Well, remember, even with Greg McDermott going from UNI to Iowa State, and he struggled for a couple of years. It looked like he was going to get pushed out, and he took the back entrance to Creighton, which at the time was still in the Valley. Now Creighton is in the Big East, and it's different today. But that at the time was a step down because he looked like he was going to get shoved out, and that's not the case anymore.
Offered to New Mexico.
Yeah, right. He took the side entrance, and he made more money at New Mexico, but it was not in in a premier conference. But now the coaches are making enough, and it's that a lot of those mid-major programs, Creighton, Wichita State, and the list goes on and on, Xavier, whatever, that they are so committed to basketball that they have the resources that they want. Maybe they don't have the primetime exposure the way you do as much or as often at the Big Ten level, but it's like, oh yeah, those Big East schools, for instance, yeah, maybe they're not as prominent as the men's basketball programs in the Big Ten, but however they have what they need financially, in it through NIL. And if you take that step up to Iowa and you get thumped, you're not going back to that same level. You're going to a different level on the way down, and you're looked at as a failure. So a school like Iowa would really have to convince the people. Now, what Iowa's going to have to do, Rob, is try to convince its fans to support it on the NIL perspective. And they are fairly tapped out. And a lot of the big donors have a better relationship with Kirk. They want to support football. And whether it's they just don't like Fran hasn't cultivated a good enough a relationship or whatever, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. That just isn't the case. And when you look at the fan base, Rob, I mean, it's, fickle as it is at times. That, okay, let's say they lose Fran and then they hire, Pat Kelsey or whatever went from College of Charleston to Louisville. It's praised as a great move in the college basketball community. What would it be here? Why'd we get him? That's what people would think. The message boards, and then some would rally around the flag eventually, but the first response would not be, wow, we got a great basketball mind and a great coach. It'd be, well, he's from College of Charleston. I don't think they're real sophisticated in a lot of cases. And so this is going to be, this is a really tough place because so much has to be unwound and layered and figured out that it's not going to just take a Fran and is Fran in it for the long haul? I don't think so. I don't think the long haul to me is 4 to 5 years. And I don't think that's the case at all. I mean, I think once Jack leaves, he's probably gone, at least in college. So it's really a complicated situation, Rob, that, we've spent a long time on this podcast discussing, but I think it's worth it.
Yeah, because it's an important part of the department. It's men's basketball. I mean, to think about, the slope it's on right now and where it could still go pretty far downhill here and bottom out.
Oh, yeah.
Because if you bring in a new head coach and he wants to rebuild and he's not winning for a year or two, people aren't going to donate.
No.
People probably aren't going to support that. So it's really hard here to figure out how to put this. I don't envy Beth at all for having to try to figure this out because it's not easy. We can move the student section. We can put in put in more bathrooms, put in another elevator, things like that. But in the age of NIL, you got to have a budget to get student athletes. And I don't blame Tony Perkins one bit. This is as marketable as Tony Perkins may ever be in his life. And he's worked his ass off and with the help of the Iowa program to get to where he is. He says, hey, I'll come back. If you give me market value, sorry, we don't have the money.
Yeah.
That's not good.
Right. You're in a terrible situation because, again, those other programs, the ones that are basketball first, they don't have to worry about football. Nope. They just worry about basketball when it comes to NIL. And if you're Tony and you've got 1 year left and your options are A, to stay at Iowa and make way less than market value, B, go pro, but let's face it, pro for him is probably Europe, or C, stay here 1 more year in the United States, play at college, which is, it's still a very visible platform, and make really good money for 1 year. You're going to take that option. It's a no-brainer. And I know people, he loves Iowa. Well, yes, but Iowa's got to love him back. Yeah. It's not a one-way, and let's face it, Rob, and I know these are some of the vocal minority, but they're vocal, period. That they gauge their love for an athlete based on their most recent performance. And
they're fans.
And Tony struggled late because Tony was hurt. He's trying to battle through injuries and he struggled. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, he sucks. What happened to him? He regressed this year. And then they call him out. And then why would he feel loved? I mean, you can only have so much Teflon. And so, and then the worst part though of this, Rob, is the crossroads. When you look right this very second, the what they have coming in is good enough to get to the NCAA tournament next year. Once they get a couple of filler spots. Peyton Sanford is probably an all Big Ten player. Josh Dix is capable of that. Same thing with Owen Freeman. You look at Brock Harding. He's capable of being a very good player. I don't know if he's a starter yet, but he certainly can carry close to starters minutes. And then Laji Dembele. I think he's also got capabilities of taking that step. Bryce Sanford has capabilities of taking that step. They have the ability. I think Fran is a good enough coach to put him in that position. Granted, they need to fix defense, and I can't go strong enough on that area. But that said, it could all go away very, very quickly. If Fran decides, you know what, Patrick's going to leave, Jack goes to Florida for prep school. I'm going to go watch him. I'm going to watch my boy play, Patrick, and I'm going to take a year off and then go into coaching somewhere else, maybe coach Jack. And then Peyton Sanford says, you know what, I'm going to hit the portal and I'm going to check out my NBA situation. Josh Dix says, yeah, I'm going to go to Creighton. Owen Freeman's on the open market. And
Owen Freeman says, show me the money.
Exactly. and his market value is, it starts with probably 7 figures.
Yep.
It's in that neighborhood. Then all of a sudden you're like, you're back to Lickliderville very, very quickly. So the floor can fall, be a trapdoor. So, be careful what you wish for here because of that situation. Now, it can, with NIL money, the good part is it can all come back very quickly.
Yep.
But as you said, this base is not always willing to take that step forward, and plus
there's only so much money to go around. And
right.
As you said, football is going to it's a football school.
Mm-hmm.
Kirk has a better relationship with the big money donors, as you said. There's only so much to give.
Yeah.
So are the big money donors holding money back because they don't like Fran, or are they just like, I'm giving enough here? What the hell's the university doing? And that's, again, I know we're repeating stuff here, but these are all part of the puzzle.
Yeah.
The university the NCAA has to allow its listen, let them form a union, pay them, market value, get some control here, have a system so it's not the Wild West, and maybe that fixes situations like this.
Yeah. And then the other part of it is, and this is probably where it gets really frustrating for a lot of Iowa fans, is you look 2 hours to the west and you look at what TJ Otzelberger has done in a very short period of time. The year before he got there, they were 0-18 in the Big 12. And in a short period of time, he's gotten transfers. He's gotten 5 stars. And this is the second time in a 3-year period they're in the Sweet 16, where Iowa hasn't been in 25 years. And now Iowa State has a little bit different donor situation. I think they have higher money donors, the big farms that are part of it. But I don't think it's like they're giving way more. But there's a relationship there that's different. And this is where Fran needs to, if he's going to be in this for even next year, because you can't just say, well, you know what, I'm going to do this one more year and then, be a Tom Davis lame duck. I mean, you have to cultivate those relationships. And TJ Otzelberger has done that and Fran has not. I mean, that's the basis of it. You've got to make sure you work those relationships. If you find out that, hey, donors are giving to Kirk because they like Kirk more, well, I need to find out why. What am I doing wrong here? And Fran, for all of his pluses, has never been introspective that way. His ego won't let him be, and so that's where that's what lies at the crux of the whole situation and why it's so complicated, because you got a 65-year-old guy who's a good coach. He's got a contract, so you can't just fire him. And plus, coaches see that too. It's like, wow, all he did was take you to the NCAA tournament 4 straight years, and this year just barely missed it. But we got to fire him. come on, what what's the deal? So,
And then
or
you show the next guy in the books.
yeah,
This is what we have to offer you in
yeah,
NIL. This is what this program support is like. And I just, again, who's that attracting?
yeah. That's that's the whole crux of this whole situation. And then we're back to kind of Alfordville 20 years ago, where
Yeah.
Alford looked at it as, we can't get a practice facility. This is a football school. They're not supporting me. And even though he was, there wasn't a lot of love there, but that was the reality.
He made a
And
lot of that his own.
oh, sure he did, because he had sellout crowds. I mean, people wanted to buy into him,
Yeah.
but Pierce and the way he treated people, I think, really eroded a ton of that, which is really the major impetus and why we are where we are.
And to your point of maybe it is the vocal minority on social media and just in the Hawkeye fan base that says, that disparages Tony because he struggled down the end because of an injury. Let him leave. We'll just get somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
If you've listened to our conversation for the last 45 minutes, that's not happening.
No,
You're not getting a second team all Big Ten guard out of the portal with what you have to offer.
right. I remember, on senior day, he struggled. And part of that, and I remember asking Brad Underwood, the Illinois coach, whose team, by the way, is playing in the Sweet 16 today against Iowa State. So,
With that, Illinois has some transfers on its
yeah,
roster.
Illinois
They
has some
invest.
dudes.
The Illinois folks like them some basketball.
Yeah, they've always invested, whether it's been above the table or under it. But
Exactly, it's just they just don't get in trouble for it anymore.
yeah, I know they, if they give them Blazers, they're legit now. But the funny part is, and here's another thing, Rob. I did put a poll up because they're playing today, and I asked people, how do you vote? Illinois, Big Ten first, Iowa State, never Illini. Why? Nancy Kerrigan voice, and then won't watch. Right now, out of 1,500 votes, 38.3% said Iowa State, 31.1% said Illinois, 13.4% why, and then 10.3% won't watch. So it's basically split down the middle between and But I digress. On Brad Underwood's point was, he said, Tony put 30 on us, and previously he used the first top of the person on our scouting report. He's the first person we mentioned. They decided to put Terrence Shannon, who's probably the talent wise the best player in the Big Ten, as far as the next level. And that's part of the reason why he struggled. But other people didn't lift him up either in that game, so it wasn't just him. But that said, he's good enough for Iowa. He struggled, and there were reasons for that, but Iowa needed to come up with a plan, and they still could. It's if somebody comes up, but again, you're stressing out your fans. You're putting so much pressure on your fans to bring in a left tackle from Alabama who bolts 2 months later, to provide for this, provide for that, and it's like, man, I'm just trying to get by because there's inflation and there's all kinds of stuff going on in the world. And so it's complicated.
Schools are getting big fat TV contracts.
Yeah, right. And that's why, I expect it to happen very soon, where the schools will start to pay the athletes. The money that people will donate will go to the athletic department. The athletic department will have an idea of how much money it could pay. Now there will be other, that's still NIL, where they can still do stuff on the side. They can still go get TV contracts, promote these businesses, and do all those types of things without having to be, like what Caitlin Clark does. They don't have to be involved through the collective, but it's going to have to happen at some point because people are going to be tapped out. And what happens if we ever have a recession again?
Yeah.
I mean, then that's going to dry up. And, and you look at like A&M, the oil wells, those donors, and then they practically own the school. I mean, they could write a $75 million check for a coach to go away. Nobody in Iowa can compete with that. Not if Iowa and Iowa State even combined.
Nope. Well, like I said, we spent like 50 minutes on that. So that's kind of where the meat of the we wanted the meat of the podcast to be, because it's a very involved situation that we wanted to share what we know and kind of talk through this. And it's been a good exercise. And I think we're going to talk about this a lot more moving forward. But we do want to get to football and women's basketball and take a little break here, and we will do that. Want to damn, I had that pulled up, had my read pulled up, and then I did away with it for some reason. All right. Support for the podcast comes from Systems Unlimited, celebrating 50 years of providing services to people living with disabilities and mental health needs throughout East Central Iowa. A list of their services and upcoming events can be found at sui.org. That is sui.org. Thank you to Systems Unlimited for supporting our podcast, and more importantly, the great work it's done in the community for more than half a century. We're going to hear from a few more sponsors now. Scott and I will be back shortly on the other side to get into some football and women's basketball. Hang in there. And we're back to tell you that switching is easy. We do it all the time. We switch on the lights. We switch TV channels. Some of us switch partners while square dancing. Well, that's a stretch, but what's not a stretch is how you can switch and save with State Farm. In fact, State Farm agent Chad Birch right here in Iowa City can switch you over so you can start saving today. Chad and his team are ready to welcome you to the State Farm neighborhood. With Chad Birch, it's easy to switch and save. Just give him a call when you want the real deal. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. All right, Scott, that was a good convo on the men's basketball. I think we got a lot accomplished there. Where do we want to go next? Let's go to football. We'll finish up, save the best for last with women's basketball. Sickness, unable to get to the press conference the other day. You were there. I know before we started recording, you were most intrigued by the kind of the collaboration of Tim Lester's playbook being introduced within the parameters of what Iowa wants to do foundationally with the head coach that's involved with the offense. We've talked about that quite a bit too on this podcast, but that's really what the spring is going to be, is trying to figure this thing out, right? And put this thing together.
Yeah, this is the multi-million dollar question, for future NIL or whether they can get anybody in the portal this spring is, how do you put this together? And we've all been skeptical, let's say, of Kirk willingly buying in to different aspects of offensive reconstruction, because it needs to be. I mean, it was the worst offense statistically in the Big Ten since 1984. And if you're going to compare those two eras, and that was Northwestern back when Northwestern should have been in the Ivy League and not in the Big Ten, you might as well just say that Iowa's the worst of all time, and you're not wrong.
It's the Etzel of offenses, really. Yeah. It needs to be modernized.
It's use my case, it's the 1976 orange Ford Maverick of offense.
79 Ford Fiesta. I had a sunroof.
Oh, you had a sunroof.
Yeah,
awesome.
Manual, but it was a sunroof.
I had my next car was a 78 Ford Fairmont. It was called Red Ruby. And after about every week I had to, pull out the spark plugs and because the oil would fuse them together and stuff.
Good friend of mine had a Pacer too. That was a trip.
So,
If you've never ridden in a Pacer, man,
yeah,
you haven't experienced life.
yes. Anybody ask for an old Pacer?
I love that.
Like a good neighbor. I
Love it.
love that one too. But to me, the most fascinating part was when you started talking about Tim Lester and his offense and what he brings and how Kirk's going to let him kind of do that. And I'll just read a little bit of his quote from the other day. And he's like, when Greg came, it was a cooperative effort. We visited, blah, blah, blah. And he said, we kept a lot of the passing terminology that he was familiar with. And then some of the systematic stuff and some of the running game stuff that we kept in our language. So it was a mixture there. But that was his decision, basically. He was comfortable with that. I think the bottom line is the guy who's going to call the plays has to be comfortable with the terminology, is what the terminology is going to be, because it has to come out naturally and quick. And he said whether it was with Tim or whomever we hired this year is basically going to be the same thing. And basically, we're just taking his playbook material and going with it. And he added that it's been challenging for everybody, and myself included, just learning the language and all that type of thing and trying to keep up. And I think that's good. I think this is healthy. I think this is the right move for this program, which is let his offense, let him handle the entirety of the scheme. The things that Kirk can control, and I think is fair, is how do players block developmentally and fundamentally. That's fine. No worries there. And then the complementary thing, which makes half the fan base go, oh, I don't want to hear that term ever again. That's fine too, because it's in the fourth quarter and you're up by 3. Some teams, some programs would prefer, let's get after their ass and score again. Iowa might be like more of the fashion of, let's milk as much clock as we can. And if we can score, great. Otherwise, we're going to put our defense in the field in a position to win. And as long as you win, that's the ultimate factor. But don't hamstring your offense either. And schematically, they've done that over the years. And then, of course, now they've got somebody who has a different kind of familiarity. So instead of saying, well, I don't know, we need to do – no, let Tim handle this. He's calling the plays. He's well-versed in this, and he's handling the scheme, and the scheme needs to change. So I liked what I heard there. Of course, we're all skeptical, Rob, and we do, we should be, because we've heard for the last couple of years, oh, yeah, I think it'll be fine. You're surprised it should be good. Well, it hasn't been that case. But, so I am skeptical to see, all right, now what are they going to do in certain situations where in the past they've done one thing? Will they continue to do the same thing? But overall, that was my main takeaway, because there wasn't necessarily a lot of news that came out of that press conference. And quite frankly, for the first time in a long time, football's kind of in the background. It's, it's not the first thing people talk about these days with Iowa sports. That'll change in 2 weeks. It'll change. But today, that's the case.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's going to be a wait and see for me. I want to see how this looks when it's actually, in Kinnick Stadium with 70,000, and the pressure's on, and you got to deliver. And do you have the personnel to do that at skill positions and on the line? Is the line going to be better than it was last year? Because it's performance based in addition to schematic. Has to improve. Quarterback play obviously has to improve. But it just seems to me that this is a better partnership, if you will, with Tim Lester. I think what I see from his offense, I see elements of what Iowa likes to do and has liked to do anyway. Tight end usage, running the football, getting downhill. That was different with Greg Davis. They were trying to, I think that was a square peg in a round hole, trying to
absolutely
mesh that together. I'm more optimistic that these two philosophies, approaches can come together and work.
Right. I mean, Greg Davis he was coaching the passing game the way you would at a place where you get receivers running 4-3. Where you get, the players that can, I said, what his offense to play design is for point guards. Iowa's usual receivers are more like small forwards, and it just didn't work. I mean, there were 3-yard outs, and try to shake it. There was one element that I really liked with his offense that CJ Beathard did really well with Matt Vandenberg that really has not translated, and that was the option to throw off the snap and throw in a one-step kind of a swing pass that they pick up 6-8 yards on a lot, and I think they needed to have that. Although, to be honest with you, I'm not sure the last two quarterbacks could have completed many of those passes, meaning Deacon and Spencer. But this time around, I think it's first of all Kirk being able to divest himself, which is helpful. The blocking part of it, that could be him. That's him.
Yeah, that's fine.
Whether it's zone or gap, but it's going to be. I think there's going to be more motions. And there needs to be, because the difference today is you can't rely on cut blocking because it's officiated differently, and so you need to have more motions to hold the second level in a little bit more. And that's been a real problem that we haven't discussed a lot. Is I know Kirk complained a lot about cut blocking, but when you can't do that in a zone-based system, you've got to compensate with something else, and they never really did. They didn't have that counterpunch, or they tried to, and then they go away from it. And it's like, why are you going away from it? But alas, I digress. But this is that to me was the most interesting. The second thing was the Cade McNamara part of it. That Cade is involved. He's throwing. He's not really dropping and throwing, and he's certainly not moving and throwing because it's an ACL. But they believe that he should be perfectly ready by June, which would mean 7-on-7, and then ready for camp in
How many
August.
months is that?
That'll be about 8.5 to 9.
Yeah, that's right on the border. Is it 9 like the low point for ACL? And I don't know what he did. Just for reference, I was interviewed Aaliyah Guyton recently, the incoming Iowa women's basketball recruit who tore her ACL, I think, in the beginning of January. And she was looking at a November return, so roughly 11 months. But she was telling me, like, at 9 months, you can start to do things normal, but there's a buildup from there as well. And she didn't really have much MCL damage. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, maybe you do, what the procedure was for Cade, but I just hope they don't. Hopefully they, and I assume they will. They have great doctors and trainers over there. They don't push it. Just let him. He's smart enough to absorb what's going on and what's being taught without having. It certainly benefits him to be out there and being able to do it. But if he can get timing with his receivers, just teach him what he needs to do and don't push him physically.
Yeah, and. The good part is when you're talking 7-on-7, by that stage, he should be able to drop, should be able to take the steps and drop and throw. Running may be a little challenging. Don't have a heavy brace on.
Yep.
Make sure that you're not doing too many lateral movements yet, but it's not like there's a pass rush or anything anyway.
Right.
He should be okay. And then that's the route adjustments will the starting the second week of June, he should be okay for that. And so it is the timing of it was better than, say, if it happened in mid-November.
Yeah.
Then you're really pushing it for camp. And then, he'd be at 11 months going into 10 and a half or so going into training camp. And even then you might give him kind of some breaks, but be careful, of course, but he should be okay then too. So, but the interesting part about the spring, Rob, is you have 2 scholarship quarterbacks. Neither one were really impressive last year. I mean, Deacon Hill obviously was not. And Marco Lainez was from a running perspective when we got to see him, but from a passing perspective wasn't real good. Tim Lester now has the opportunity to get his eyes on them to see where they size up. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if, they hit the portal again, and they, which is both sad based on the conversation we just had for an hour, but it's true that they could go in and be able to pick up a quarterback and maybe somebody who's they're going to step in as the number 2, or potentially challenge Cade or have to start because Cade hasn't been healthy the last couple of years.
Well, the money was there for Proctor, right?
Yeah.
So either it's still there, or the people that didn't donate, if they're willing to support, they'll support, if the coaches feel like they need to add at a given position. And I think another part of this spring is John Budmeyer and the receivers and what's happening there, and what development is happening there, what changes, things like that. That's critical here to the puzzle.
Yeah, and I felt stupid that we didn't get to that in the press conference. That was just one area. There was just
noticed that.
Yeah, there was just one area I was like, after the fact. But that goes hand in hand with the quarterbacks. Is wide receiver development. It's been poor at best, and it spans multiple coaches. It's not just Kelton Copeland. It's easy to kind of throw him under the bus, but it's way beyond that. I mean, when you're talking about the 5 year, I bring this up frequently, that from 2012 through 2021, the 24 freshman recruits Iowa had, only 5 finished their careers as wide receivers in the program.
That's just alarming.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about just over 20%. I mean, you need to be at least 50. I mean, just to be competitive, and you look at those guys, and a few of them went on the defensive side of the ball, like Henry Marquez and Devontae Young, but then there were others that didn't materialize, and there were others who transferred. And this doesn't even count the guys that started out at other schools, like an Oliver Martin or a Charlie Jones, so you throw them into the mix, and you're like, geez, what is going on here? So when you look at what they have now, they need to have a lot of development very quick. You need to have Caleb Brown keep taking steps forward. He looked decent at the end of the year. I think in some ways we looked at him like, wow, he's great. Well, comparatively, yeah, but he needs to be better. And then I think you look at the others, and Seth Anderson, caught a first pass of the season, caught a touchdown, and then what? Well, was it his fault, or was it the passing game, or was it quarterback? Yeah, probably all of them. And then Jarriett Bowie is now a part of it, and so is Cade Weegan, Jacob Bostic. Can any of the new guys come in, or do they have to hit the portal there as well? I mean, that wouldn't be the worst possible thing either. If you're a MAC level player or FCS player who's been successful at that level, that hey, come here, play right away, help build our offense in one of the best conferences in the country. I mean, I think you can make that case. So, but it's going to take, it's going to see what kind of developer John Budmeyer is at this position, because after what happened with football, or what happened last couple of years with him on, helping with quarterbacks, there's not a lot of faith in him either right now.
Nope. And I'm going to give him a chance, just like Tim Lester and everybody else. Let's see what they can do in the new setup. And we're going to cut the football talk there, and we'll have plenty more to talk about next week when we're not taking up a lot of the podcast with men's basketball. We can dive in a little bit more about what we think of what's going on in the spring there. But we should probably turn our attention to Albany, New York. But yesterday, Scott, was a good day for Caitlin Clark. You got Ice Cube. See what I did there? Yesterday was a good
day. And she didn't even have to use her AK.
No. And $5 million for 10 games. Sign me up for that. In the On3 Basketball League, which is the product of Ice Cube, formerly of NWA, now a solo act. Actor, all those good things. It's just some of this shit that's happened with Caitlin Clark and the Iowa women's basketball, Scott, is just surreal. And that was another one of those, you're like, freaking Ice Cube is tweeting about women's basketball at Iowa. It's surreal stuff.
Yeah, exactly. It's I mean, did we really think this was going to happen a couple of years ago? And here we are. She's the biggest name in sports today. That'll in a week and a half that'll change, but today that's the case. And when you got Ice Cube, a guy from my youth for sure was when NWA, and I was actually, it's funny you mentioned this because like in the spring, I kind of get in this funk, go back to rap and rap from my youth. And so I was kind of singing a little bit of Eazy-E's Boys in the Hood earlier today. So we're really freaky territory. It's like AI is really evaporating here, but to have Cube offer $5 million to play the big three, man, that'd be kind of funny if she spurned the WNBA for that, wouldn't it?
She could do both, actually, I think. But I think if she signs the WNBA contract, they may say, listen, that's not what we want you doing. So she may have to make a choice. But I think the point stands that we've been making all along to the folks that were like, she should stay at Iowa or she's going to lose money. Yeah, I think we're seeing every step here, each new sponsorship she adds and things like this. She is the brand, and it's going with her when she leaves.
Yeah, I know. And for all the people thinking that, nobody cares about the WNBA, she's going to take her star to the WNBA and it's going to shine brighter. It's not the other way around. And she is the name, she is the brand. Look at the TV ratings, the highest rated first and second round games ever. On Saturday afternoon, it's going to be really high again. And then ABC, Monday night,
ABC again, afternoon on Saturday, just like last Saturday.
Yeah, and this is against a good team. And then if they somehow win that game and they play Monday night, take your pick which team. But I tell you what, if it's LSU, Iowa, the ratings will be off the charts. It'll be so high that we'll never see anything like it again. And then, at UCLA, it might be comparable as well if Iowa makes it that far. But this is right now, women's basketball is at an all-time zenith. And the other night, Rob, was a
did you do the decibel thing?
Yeah.
What'd you get?
The spikes were almost as high as on Saturday, 116, but there were a lot of them. I mean, It was like, and then for most of the game action, it was north of 100 decibels every sequence. So, I mean, that's consistently loud. It's consistently the loudest I've ever heard it there. And we've seen some great atmospheres this year, but it was the loudest. It was like, oh my gosh, I got to close my ears a couple of times. And the loudest intros I was mentioning to people were Gabby Marshall and Hannah Stolke at 114 in their intros. And then a couple of shots, I think it was Sydney Falder's, and one that got up to 116. So that was that sequence from Gabby Marshall's block to her running down the court and putting it up with her left hand, and Caitlin's still standing there going, "Come on!" But that was as big of a pivotal of a play that we've seen this all season.
Historic season, no doubt about it. And they closed the book on the Carver Hawkeye Arena portion of that, and so the ladies are done there with their careers and went out on a high note. I actually was encouraged by what I saw Monday night in Iowa, being able to win a grinded out game in a style it doesn't prefer to play, and still found a way to win in a physical game. They showed they can take teams that are going to bully them, and they still won. And that's important because you have to show you can win any type of game. You can't just outscore everybody and, be a track meet. So that gives me encouragement going into this weekend, Scott.
Sure. Absolutely. I use the comparison that this was like playing for another team playing Iowa football. The West Virginia's defense was so good, and they just drag you down and frustrate you to the point where if you don't hit the shots, the layups that you need, that you're going to be in real trouble. And they were an outstanding defensive team. They were very physical. And the first half, it got called completely in their path. I mean, they only had 7 fouls up to halftime that were called. There were 7 fouls on each possession, but only 7 that were called. In the second half, I saw a lot of people complaining, I'm going to go to the NCAA about this. Well, they got even more physical. But I think that the thing that inspired me was, the 2 players I mentioned earlier. Gabby Marshall played about as well as any player on the floor and didn't score because she was asked to do a ton defensively. And she got, she went from being kind of on ball quickness to on ball toughness. Got her hands up. She was talking. She was chattering the whole time,
Great points, yes.
She was fantastic. A lot of deflections, doing all the things that they needed her to do. That wasn't necessarily scoring. She's a 3-and-D player. She needs to be. She needed to be a D player, and she was. Hannah Stolke was the same way in the post. At times you wonder if she's a little bit hesitant. She was very physical the other day and needed to be, and up forcefully. That is important because let's say they get past Colorado, and I think Colorado is a great team, so it's possible that the run ends Saturday. But let's say they get past them, you're going to be facing, if you're facing LSU, it's going to be physical and with a lot of talent. So you're going to need to establish that again. So I think the fact that they were able to gut through and fight through, and even withstand runs against them and miss a ton of shots, score 6 points in the second quarter, go 1 for 10 in the fourth, and only have 7 assists for a team like Iowa that leads the country in that category, and still battle and win. I think that shows a lot of toughness on this team.
And we've talked on the podcast about maybe some of the matchups that could give Iowa difficulty. Much of that is based on post play, the not having Monica Sonano this year that the team had last year when it made its run. Can this team figure out a way to do it without a dominant post player like that? And I'm not discrediting Hannah Stolke. She's just a different player than Monica. And she also doesn't have McKenna Warnock as kind of a enforcer as well. McKenna was tough as nails.
Yeah.
And I think Sid brings that too, but it's a different makeup. And this Colorado team, Scott, has 2 starters that are 6'3", including a leading scorer, Aranette is it Vonleh?
Yeah.
She averages 14 points, and she's 6'3". She's their center. And then Quay Miller is also 6'3". So it's going to be interesting to see, how does Iowa defend that? And then how does Colorado defend Iowa with a big having to guard a guard?
That is going to be the ultimate question. And this is really, to me, it comes down to, every game's got that statistic that you kind of, okay, you got to be good at this in this game, or you're going to struggle. There's one glaring weakness Colorado has. And if Iowa exploits it, Iowa not only wins, but wins decisively. And that is they're 311th in 3-point defense nationally.
That's not a good thing to be against Iowa.
Exactly. So if Iowa could say, okay, you've got us on height, and they've played good teams with good posts. I mean, in the Big Ten, Virginia Tech was that way with Elizabeth Kitley, and the teams that are maybe even a little better than Colorado. But if they can, our guards are going to run, and they can't keep up, and in transition they're hitting threes. This could be a really a decisive win for Iowa. However, if they're missing those threes, and Colorado is getting those rebounds and being able to get in the half court and frustrate Iowa, then yes, they could beat Iowa. I mean, you look at the teams that they've played, and the Pac-12 was the deepest conference in the country this year by far. I mean, I think they have 5 teams in the Sweet 16. They beat LSU, they beat Stanford, they beat USC. They've also lost twice to UCLA, 3 times to Oregon State. Split with USC, lost in NC State. So they played a lot of really good competition and won some and lost some. But I think really it comes down to, if Iowa can run the way it wants to run, and if it can make those threes, if you get Kate Martin and Gabby Marshall and Kylie Feuerbach and Taylor McCabe when she's in there making those threes in transition, of course, the GOAT, then, I think Iowa can win by 10 points or more, like they did last year.
Yeah, and that's taking advantage of your strengths against their weakness. The one concerning thing on Monday, and sometimes these are just a one-game situation, but West Virginia came in that game as really a poor rebounding team. I think they were -2 a game coming into that, and they gave Iowa trouble on the backboards. Iowa needs to address that against a team like Colorado that has length and is able to crash the boards, but I still like Iowa. But Colorado did beat a Kansas State team we saw a couple times this year, Scott. That's a really solid team. That was a good win, too. So they're all going to be hard now at this point, right? These are all good teams. You have an off night, and that's the story of the big dance, right? You get sent home.
Yeah, that's the truth. It's just, you play bad, you lose. You go home and you never play again, and it's really sad that happens. They beat Drake too. Drake's a good team, so they've got some players here that are capable of winning. And but it's in Albany, New York, so no matter who they play, at worst it's neutral, but probably more people will be there to see Caitlin Clark. That's only a couple of hours north of your home market, and people are going to be wow, let's go check this out. And so I would expect them to have a nice crowd, but in some ways it's probably a good thing that they're getting away too, because being at home, even though the home court advantage is otherworldly.
You talked about the decimal level. I'm sure West Virginia hadn't experienced that before.
No, I mean, even some great arenas in the Big 12 were not like this. I mean, no place I've seen is like this, and but with that also brings the pressure. Sometimes you can play looser or freer on the road. We've seen it with football too, that you just, not only just us against the world, but a lot of times it's just, hey, let's just worry about us, period. And I think that's kind of the case here, that could be really helpful for them.
You think they want LSU, or would they like to see LSU lose?
It's a great question. It depends on the matchup.
How about the fans?
I think you're split, aren't you, Rob? I think you want
the one angle with UCLA, and it's not the same as last year's rematch of the national championship game with the this and the this and all that other stuff. But Shannon Perry, she's married now. I apologize for not knowing her last name. She played here in the late 90s. She's the associate head coach for UCLA. So that's kind of a cool angle there. But I just think Monday night, LSU, Iowa, Angel and Caitlin, this Kim Mulkey craziness that's going on. I think that's the show. I think that's the show we all need, right?
That's definitely the show that the nation wants. It's definitely the show ESPN wants, because you'll have really the two biggest names in the sport.
And UCLA is really good too. I saw them the other night. They could beat LSU and be a way tougher matchup for Iowa.
And I think that's the truth. LSU hasn't been great in this tournament. No. In fact, Middle Tennessee State was pretty good against them, and now with I think UCLA may be a bad matchup for them as well. But with Angel Reese and stuff, you just wonder. They'll see Iowa and they'll think the same thing. That there's all this pomp and circumstance around Caitlin Clark. Maybe her supporting cast isn't quite as good as it was last year. In some ways, it's a little better, and I don't think it's quite as good in some other ways. But still, it wouldn't surprise me at all if, let's say, the winner of that game happens, and then the winner doesn't go to the national title game, if that game outrates the championship game. And on a Monday night, LSU, Iowa, SEC Big Ten, Angel Reese, Caitlin Clark, Kim Mulkey, maybe the Washington Post will be there.
Maybe they drop that story Monday night before the game.
Yeah, that would be something.
From the Iowa players, and they would never say this, but I think the satisfaction of beating LSU to go to the Final Four and keep them being the team that dethroned the national championship team, I think there would take great satisfaction in that, and they should.
Sure, to get revenge after last year, and to beat Kim Mulkey. I think
the world is with you.
Yeah, exactly. And then then maybe Juju Watkins waits for you, and that could be what some people would consider the passing of the torch, from one great player to another. and Caitlin Clark to Juju Watkins. But that said, I'm never going to rule out 22 until she leaves. So I'm gonna. That's and what this is funny, and this is what journalists fret about. On Saturday, after I watched them the way they played against Holy Cross, even though they won just big 26 points, and but watching Caitlin's mannerisms and knowing, and then kind of seeing a little bit of West Virginia and their style of play, I started to get kind of worried that a story that I was going to run for today on Kate Martin. I'm like, what if they lose Monday night? Then I don't have a story. Then, she's not going to play anymore. I'm not going to write that story about how, so then I ended up, well, maybe I should bump this up. So, I was the last person to leave Sunday night trying to get this all done, and got it written and published it Monday morning. And, ultimately it didn't matter, but still it's one of those freak out moments that you have, because you don't want to just, because I met with her parents and you're just like, oh, I don't want to lose this story. So, but that's kind of what what you fear. This profession. I've lost some stories that way. Like two years ago, if they beat Creighton at home, I had a story on Lisa Bluter I was running, but then they lost. And it was like, well, they're not going to Sweet 16. So I ended up doing it, but I did it like a year later, so that's just, it's also like the stories you write that, you got to get rid of because they lost, during the middle of the game, or, that sort of thing.
2 at Penn State. That story, I probably wrote that thing 10 times from Beaver Stadium. That game was insane. That's one of those ones that sticks in my mind. But yeah, check out Scott's story on Kate Martin on The Athletic and all his great work that he does there. What was I going to say? My final thought on this is, I know a lot's made of, the microscope, Scott, is on Caitlin. Every move, every breath right now, the camera's on, the microscope is on. She was feeling pressure this weekend. Iowa needed to get out of that first weekend. Or, the narrative about her changes, right? That's the second time in 3 years that they haven't gotten to the Sweet 16. I think some of the pressure, and I think the other kids were feeling it a little bit too, and it feeding off of her kind of being tense. It seemed like after that game Monday, there was almost like an exhale. And you mentioned this earlier. I think they may be a little more free in Albany. New surroundings just kind of can galvanize yourself. It's just you there. You're all kind of together on the road. There's something about that. I think they'll play a little bit more loose and a little bit more efficiently, so to speak, this weekend. Yeah,
because as wonderful as Iowa fans can be, in women's basketball in particular, and it's kind of like being wrapped in a blanket, and sometimes you just want to take the blanket off, and you just want to kind of, and I think that's kind of where they are. And there'll be them at the hotel, be them working out, there'll be Iowa media, there'll be other media there, but that'll be small doses, certain periods of time, and that's it. And then they don't have to go back to their apartment, or they don't have to see it when they decide to go eat or whatever, and even be hovered around. So I think overall, this is a good thing for them. I've been wrong on that one once. I think it was when they blew out Michigan, and I was like, well, the week off is going to help them. Well, they went to Indiana. But Indiana's a good team too. They're in the Sweet 16, and they were coming off in a humiliating loss to Illinois at the time. And so then they changed their tune and played their best game of the year, and that's also a good dose of reality for Iowa as well. And I think in this case, everything has been, they're a good team and they know it, but there's been a ton of pressure. I mean, going to the Big Ten championship game and playing Nebraska was all in on them. And here they are, they're still.
You can really see it. I know it's cliche, Scott, but you can really see it with this team this year. They get everybody's best shot.
Yeah. Every game's, I don't know if these games are sold out or not. I haven't seen anything
I
yet,
got to
but
think they, at least her games, I would think
yeah,
are. I don't know how big this arena is.
yeah, I don't either. It's Albany, New York. It should be like,
Maybe the home of the former Albany Patroons, coached by Phil Jackson in the
yeah,
CBA.
right.
Remember that?
Oh my God,
That was
no,
way back, man, in like the eight. Well,
no.
yeah, it was the 80s, I think. When Phil Jackson retired, he was the head coach of the Albany Patroons of the CBA, and they played, I think, in the arena that they're going to play in this week.
Wow. I remember the old, CBA with the Quad City Thunder, and I don't know if you remember the USBL.
Yeah,
We had the St. Joe Express when I was there in St.
really.
Joseph, Missouri. And yeah, that didn't go off very well. Although Kareem Abdul-Jabbar made his coaching debut for the Dodge City team in St. Joe. Oliver Miller had blown up bigger than what he was, and he chased down the officials and wanted to kill him after a game. And what made it bad from the very get-go, I know I'm going on a different tangent, but was they wanted to get out and get the support of the community. So they went to Rubidoux Middle School, like for the players, to tell them to stay away from drugs and all that. Later that night, they all get busted driving down with marijuana. And this was before their first game. So it was just, as you can imagine, kind of a disaster. But anyway, I digress. I don't know I can't remember if Albany wasn't in the league anyway at that point. I think Randy Moss was on one of the teams, but he didn't travel to St. Joe, back then. And so Albany might, I would expect there'd be a lot of people from the city that comes up Saturday for this and Monday night for this, and New England area.
If your folks are making the trip, have a safe trip out there and enjoy your time and enjoy the games. And if you're not, still enjoy the games on TV with whoever you're watching them with. I have a good feeling. I think they get through this weekend and play in the Final Four again. But as we said, these are all good teams. You're maybe a little bit off, and that could be it.
No, that's exactly right, Rob. I mean, and Colorado could do it to them too. I mean, they beat LSU to start the season, so why not beat both teams that were in the national title game and then maybe play LSU again? But again, I look at like several markers here in this matchup that really make sense to me. And assist to turnover ratio, Iowa's 5th in the country, they're 14th. Field goal percentage, Iowa's 3rd, they're 23rd. 3-point percentage, Iowa 9th, they're 30th. I mean, those aren't bad numbers for Colorado. They're just a little bit off from what Iowa is, and then you could throw in their competition, and you're like, that's pretty close. Field goal defense, Iowa 146th, Colorado 188. 3-point defense, Iowa, 160 or 101, I think it's 161 and 101. I can't read my number here, but Colorado 311. And if Iowa's hitting threes, which they're really good at, 9th in the country, percentage wise, that's the area where you go, okay, this is where Iowa buries them with 14 3-pointers, and Caitlin Clark's drilling them, and Gabby Marshall's drilling them. Then, Iowa's playing Monday night.
Yeah, as Scott said, keep an eye on that Saturday, how Iowa's knocking it down from behind the arc. Things are going well there. It's probably a good sign for the Hawkeyes. And we will talk about the games this weekend on next Thursday's podcast. As we said, we'll talk a lot more spring football moving forward here. Just was appropriate in this podcast to address the men's basketball situation, because I think it's very important right now what's going on there, and I do believe it's at a crossroads. And what Scott and I have discussed, I think we're both in agreement there on that. So we'll actually follow that story as well. We'll see if there's any more movement on the roster between now and next Thursday. But we really appreciate everybody listening to the podcast. Special thanks to all of our sponsors for helping us bring you these podcasts free of charge, no Patreon or any of that stuff. So thanks again to them. And you guys have a good rest of your week, and we will talk to you next week. Say goodbye, Scott.